Ahoy! Happy New Year to all. Hope 2021 brings in cheer, well being, and peace for all of us. The writer talks in keeping with this spirit of holiday and the need to recharge and reconnect with our inner selves, brings to you a delightful dialogue with a talented writer from the US, Steve Patrick O'Farrell, also known as S.P.O'Farrell. His novel and his smash hit, Simone LaFray and the Chocolatiers Ball, is a young adult detective fiction that is highly charming, appealing, and intriguing to all age groups. This action packed adventure of the young Simone, fashioned after the novelist's niece, together with her vibrant friend, the Bee, her vivacious younger sister, Mia, and their pet dog, is an unputdownable book. This 138-page novel, set in Paris, provides an insight into the world of arts, French museums, the intelligence, the workings of a patisserie, as well as unravels the minds of teens and adults alike. The cover page, akin to a fairy tale, only adds to the charm of this brilliant book. In fact, Steve tells me that this is the first book in the series of 6 to 8 books that has been planned. Another interesting snippet about its author, Steve, is that he is a real estate appraiser by day who transforms into this committed writer by night, and this novel is a result of his extensive research and insight into the world of suspense. Besides providing a crash course in French, I am certain that this novel will be one of the best holiday readings for you. Before we dive into the second segment, where I am in conversation with the author S.P. O'Farrell, let me reiterate and urge my subscribers, my dear subscribers, each one of you, please get one more so that I can continue to bring to you such brilliant writers from across the world. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And please do write in your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Have a great year, happy 2021, and happy reading of the prodigious young detective Simone LaFray and the Chocolatiers Ball. Until next week, take care and ahoy. Ahoy, Steve. Welcome to the Writing Talks.
Well, thank you for having me. This is quite an honor to be a part of this dialogue. I greatly appreciate this.
It's completely my pleasure, and it must be morning for you, right?
It is. We are in Western Maryland. It's about mid-morning. We're coming out of a freeze of the holidays, but it's sort of late December in Maryland, sort of wet, sort of gray, with always a chance of ice or something like that. So we are getting through it.
I see you're seated in your office, so no work from home for you?
No, I mean, I have the ability to work from home, but I'm far more efficient when I come into the office. It's just a better work environment for me, and we're taking all precautions to separate everybody. And of course, I have it right here, our masks in case we have to do any interaction at all, but we are taking all precautions here.
Right. So besides writing, what do you do, Steve?
Well, besides writing fiction, I run a small business. I'm a full-time commercial appraiser, so I run a business of 9 people, which keeps me very busy, anywhere from 50 to 60 hours a week working on that. And then in addition to that, I'm serve on a couple of civic boards and a couple of causes here in our local community, so I tend to stay very busy.
That's fantastic, and as we were talking earlier, I mean that's such a spectrum to cover. You're into real estate on the one hand, and you're a fiction writer on the other. Oh, what a lovely spectrum to have.
It is. It's nice, and at this point in my life, it's nice to have these outlets to be able to have options to do things that are both creative and are both professionally satisfying as well. And as I was saying earlier, literacy has been a big push for me as I've been published and going, being now viewed as an author of fiction. The majority of my job is writing these really thick, extensive reports, and I've tried to convey to school kids and some others that literacy is a tool that you need in all facets of your life. So there is some connectivity there, but writing fiction is certainly a whole lot more fun than writing about a gas station or an office building or something like that.
I'm sure it is. And congratulations, a huge congratulations on the wonderful work that you came up with. Simone LaFray, am I getting it right? LaFray?
Yeah, Simone LaFray. Yeah, that's it.
Chocolatiers Ball. It's such a lovely piece of work.
Well, thank you. It's interesting how it started because it was never supposed to be published in the first place. For years, once we started to have our children, our boys, we were very adamant about reading with them and reading to them. And when you start to read, not necessarily the first books that kids read, but when they start to get into stories that have, more of a narrative to it, more of a character arc, you start to pay attention to those things. So I was always interested in writing fiction. I thought of, some potential adult fiction, not middle grade or YA or anything like that. And then, as the boys started to read at higher levels and things like that, your imagination starts to think, well, what if we did this or that? And this one was one that sort of came out of the blue. I had some other ideas that never really felt like they, at least at that time, deserved all of the work and all the effort that was going to go into it. And then this one just, came out of the blue.
That's fantastic, and what is really unique about this is it doesn't seem like young adult fiction at all. I mean, it's as appealing to adults as it is to youngsters, and I'm sure about that. And I mean this as a compliment. I finished it in two days flat, actually.
Okay, yeah, that's a good compliment, and that was one of the things when I started this. It started actually as this idea that on a vacation, and when I initially wrote what was the initial story, it was what would be considered an early chapter book. I wrote it in one night. It was 3,000 words, something like that, just to kind of get it all out, and then it sat. And one of the things that I decided when I was going to, after talking to some acquisition editors and some agents and stuff like that, that to make it a proper novel, there were some things in my head that I had to sort of get straight. And one of them was that I wasn't going to talk down to the audience at all. I had the benefit of having some of our family having these extraordinary readers, at 8, 9, 10, 12 years old. And I wanted to write stories that, didn't necessarily overly challenge a child to read them, but anybody could read them. I've had a 6-year-old read this book, and I've had a 92-year-old read this book, and they all felt satisfied by the story and the outcome and all that stuff. So that's a good compliment. But I don't think we can talk down to children. I think we need to challenge them, a little bit in the reading and in the story arcs and in the language and all of that.
No, you have a point there, because very recently I was interacting with this 14-year-old boy, and then he was reading George Orwell's 1984. I was completely taken aback by that. But again, yeah, as you're saying, it's unfair to talk down to them or just hand in those younger, easier reads. This I think is pitched perfectly.
Yeah, I think so. And, one of the other things that I experienced when I was querying agents and acquisition editors is some of them made the comment that this is, it may be considered high concept, but it doesn't sound like middle grade, that the internal voice of Simone sounds more mature. And that was always the intent. And, I think one of the things for writers that are starting out, not everyone's going to like your book. It's just, that's just the way it is. You have to be fully satisfied with the product that you're producing. And if you're satisfied with it, if you put enough work into it, you're going to find somebody that aligns with that and, will be a champion of your book, which I was thrilled to do at some point. But, you have to stay true to your voice of how you're crafting the book. Because I think when there's a lack of authenticity in the writing, it does show through.
True. And I also read that your niece was the inspiration behind this book. Is that true?
That is true. We were on a beach vacation, and my wife has a big family, and we happened to be at the beach. This was 5 years ago or so, or 4 or 5 years ago, and that year there were a lot of kids in the house. And for whatever reason that year, the kids were sort of spying on each other, and that was sort of what they did, hide and seek and all that kind of stuff. And my niece Ariel was into anything Parisian that summer, pretty extraordinary young kid. And we happened to be out to dinner, and she was sitting across the table for me, and some of the kids had spy names, these sort of made up names. And she just sat across the table to me, she said, "Uncle Steve, give me a spy name, or make up a spy name for me." And 5 seconds later, this name came out, Simone LaFray. Your name's Simone LaFray, and you're a spy that lives in Paris. and everybody laughed and thought it was great. And I just, for some reason, I could not get that name out of my head for the next 2 weeks. And all that I had to write it was, I had the name and I had the setting, Paris, and I knew that she was going to be a spy of some sort. And a few weeks later, one night, I just got it all down and put it to the side. And, a lot of drafts later, a lot of manuscripts later, a lot of rejections later, here we are today.
Amazing. There's a lovely backstory behind the story itself. That's equally intriguing.
Yeah, it is, and like I said earlier, it was never supposed to be published. Once I sort of wrote this short story or this early chapter book, my wife and I thought it would be a good idea to sort of package it up a little bit and print it out and give it to her as a Christmas gift. Right. And that was going to be the end of it. And, a few people read it, and a few people encouraged me to reach out to editors, and it just sort of snowballed and snowballed. And at some point I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to really put a lot of effort into it. And that became the process of developing it into a full novel, and then redeveloping it again, and putting the time into it to really make it something that I was proud of.
Right. So how come this French connection? I mean, Simone LaFray, and then it's set in Paris. And I think the way, the intricate details that you have put up about Paris, it's so perceptive, right? You seem to know every curb, every street.
Right. So that's an interesting point, because I've never been to Paris. And I have virtually no connection to it at all. And for me, the exciting part of this is I was able to use my full imagination on this. I didn't have any preconceived notions about the setting, the place, or anything like that. I did spend a lot of time on Google Maps, and I spent a lot of time online just trying to experience it enough so that I could visualize it, but I wanted to be able to use my imagination to really bring it to life. And luckily, some of the people that read it early, some of in the editing process and stuff like that had some firsthand experience, said that's what it feels like. So I was like, oh, thank goodness, because if the setting is off, it would show through. So I didn't have any connection at all, but I was able to do the research, which is a big part of any piece of writing. Sure. A lot of research, a lot of time invested, a lot of it that seems like it's a waste of time, but it really does help to sort of build the fabric in your mind of what you're trying to create. And luckily, it did come through in the end.
That's completely amazing. I mean, it's hard to imagine that you've never been to Paris. I actually thought you must have lived there for a couple of years.
No, I hope to get there. Maybe when things lift here a little bit, hopefully so. And the second book that's now in editing is set in Europe as well. So a lot more research, a lot more Google Maps, a lot more of all of that stuff.
I read that there's going to be some 6 or 8 in the series. Is that true?
Right. So what happened was once I knew that it was not really terribly viable as an early chapter book, that it needed more development. I contacted an editor who edited the first book and gave me a critique of the whole thing, and she felt very strongly that it needed to be developed as a full novel. So I started on that process, and what happened was I started with this huge story. I mean, it was gargantuan, and it was just too much, and I was somewhat deflected from that experience. But then when I went back and looked at it, I thought, well, there's some really good stuff in here, and I know how it starts and I know how it ends. And the best way that I could explain it is if you listen to music or you write music or something like that, I knew what all the root notes in the story was. I just didn't necessarily know how the melody tied it all together. And what I realized while I was sort of deconstructing the whole thing was that it was a series. It wasn't just one long story. It was a series of shorter stories that formed this big story that would probably run 6 to 7 books, because when I was trying to formulate like word count and all that kind of stuff, it would have been thousands and thousands of words, or no, it would have been hundreds of thousands of words, thousands of pages. And for middle grade, that's just not the target. You want to be somewhere between 40 and 60,000 words. And then I started on the and then basically I sort of deconstructed it to say, well, I'm just going to do one story at a time, which made it much easier. Well, it still took a lot of time and effort, but it made it more palatable. So then I pushed forward with writing it as a series, getting the first book done, doing my best with that, and then hopefully rolling to a second, which I was able to do, and now actually starting to frame out the third one.
Yeah, that explains there's such a tight plot and there's not a word that is wasted actually. That's brilliant.
But thank you. A lot of that is the editing. I try not to be too wordy in it because I do use, when they tested it for lexicon and all that stuff, I mean, there's some foreign language in it. There's some bigger words in it. So I didn't want it to be necessarily full of a lot of adverbs and real wordy, real extensive dialogue or anything like that. I wanted to have a certain economy of words that really highlighted the story and the characters.
That's true. I think the voice comes across very, very strongly, and it's very distinct. As you have introduced Simone and as she speaks, it does seem like this is a precocious 12-year-old who really knows her way and who really knows about things. It's the most delightful way she introduces herself as an espion, and the way she speaks about her mom. It's absolutely riveting.
Well, you're nice to say that. And I've had the benefit of having some very exceptional, strong, extraordinary women in my life. My mom, my grandmothers, my wife, who's great and provides a lot of inspiration to, a sort of inner strength that was able to come through in a lot of the writing, made it a lot easier for me to develop that voice. And all of the things that she does, her devotion to her family, all these other types of things that were important to me to be written into the book.
That's lovely. I did read in the book that you made mention of your mom and she having helped in the editing process.
She did read it, and she was probably the most surprised of anyone when I mentioned to her that I had written a book and I was going through this process. She was a school teacher and later did some administrative work in schools as well, and was an English teacher, I believe, at the start. So she was always very particular about editing our work in school, my brother and my work in school. So she was, great for that part. And then when she edited it, or when she read it, when it was still in draft form, she read it. She actually went through and marked everything up with, pencil, just like I would expect her to do. But no, she's been a nice part of this whole thing and thrilled the way it's all going.
That's lovely. So she's your most trusted editor then, and she's your best critic, is that?
She is one of them. I would say my wife is probably my number one, because she can tell me exactly what she thinks about whatever it is in the book, and she, collaborates with some of the story ideas and things like that, and is really great. She's an amazing resource for all of this. And I know I remember hearing this multiple times that you should never choose your spouse to edit things for you because it's a very personal thing, and they want it to be the best for you, and sometimes there may be some friction arise from that, but with Emily that's not been the case. She's been by far my biggest supporter in all of this, and is actually quite skilled. She has a writing minor from college, so she's very well versed in writing and structure and all that stuff. So I would say she's by far my number one with that.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And I think it's not true at all. My mom used to be my biggest critic as well, and she was the first one who would go through my manuscripts, go through my writings, and give me those really, really objective pieces of advice that you need to know. So,
yeah, I would say my biggest critic is myself for sure, because I have. One of the things that I do when I write, or I'll just think about things forever, is I have usually a very definite reaction to it, that it's either good or it's bad. And generally things are bad. It's those good things that come out. You think, oh, what if this happened? Or what if we need a character that does this? And then you sort of think about it for a while, and if it sort of hangs with you, then you can develop it into things. But I tend to be very, very much one way or the other. It's either good or it's bad. And if it's good, I'll continue to work on it. And even through that process, some things fall out, or an okay idea that leads into a good idea. But usually the bad stuff I cut really fast.
That's lovely. How come you placed Simone in a patisserie? How did this come about? Why a patisserie in the first place?
Right. So when I was doing some of my research, that seemed like a really nice setting with a distinct setting within Paris, because Paris itself is very iconic in terms of the architecture, in terms of the buildings, the river, all these amazing things where you can see a photograph of it and you immediately know where it is. The patisserie idea was one. As I was looking through Google Maps, I knew I wanted her to be in a store, and I wanted that store to have, some elegance to it, and I wanted to have some place of setting to it. And as I looked through some more photographs, the pictures of the patisseries from the outside were fantastic. They were these little sort of sleepy stores with, the wavy glass, and it had people, lined up outside. And it just seemed, there was something almost romantic about it that seemed like that would be a great setting to grow up in. And then to have this other story, because it would be sort of iconic in a way where a reader could recognize it, or if there's some panel art done to it, it's one of those neat places that, any kid would want to live in.
That's really lovely. The entire novel is so redolent, so replete with images. In fact, I actually thought that you might have had some associations with the patisserie, given the intricate way in which you have described it.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think a lot of that goes back to my professional writing as an appraiser. Is we do a lot of descriptive writing, so I was able to sort of flex that muscle within that to really build the setting. And the one thing with this book, because it's the first book in this series, is I took more time to describe the characters, to describe some of the setting, to sort of set things up. So when you get into now the second book and then the third book, it's more specific to the characters. I mean, there's certainly setting, and I certainly describe new settings the way I normally would, but it lays a lot of the groundwork moving forward in the series.
So that's a beautiful merger of your professional space and your creative space. So you're making the best use of being in real estate and getting a hang of places, and you're using that so beautifully in your writing. That's good. That's complete credit to your writing then.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we describe a lot of buildings and a lot of places. So yeah, there is that segue in there.
And how did you think of placing this young detective Simone in? This is a unique family, isn't it? A chef, a patissier, and the mother is a diplomat / spy.
Right. So that was one of the things in the initial short story. Everyone worked in the patisserie. They were all there, and they were sort of doing their thing. And then, so it didn't have much depth to it. And then the mother, as I think when I edited that maybe the second time before we sort of finalized it, I thought it would be a good idea for the mom to be a spy, to be a role model and things like that, to show, sort of, where she is. And then also, in a lot of middle grade and a lot of these later chapter books, young chapter books, the parents are usually removed from a fair amount of the action sequences. Mm-hmm. So the idea of her being the top spy in the world, the mother, seemed to be a natural once I started to develop the story or the character arcs of Simone and the father. And there were some conveniences in there that were written that it's easy to sort of separate them from the main action. It's because the father's, he's busy running his business and all this stuff, and then the mother is taken away on assignment, which seems like a plausible idea within the whole thing. So it gives a lot of space for Simone to breathe and for her action and all that stuff. But yeah, you have to have, these neat accessory characters, and they have to be extraordinary in some way, which I took a time doing with a lot of these characters through all of the rewrites and developing their dialogue so each character sounds the same, what they look like, and the things that they do, how they react to things. It's a big task to develop any character within a book.
I can imagine that completely. And I think one of the unique traits that Simone here displays is her ability to decipher. So she's able to deduce so well, very, very typical of, innate of a detective, right? So the way she figures out where her mom is, and initially from thinking that she's in Singapore, then trying to focus on the reflections that she sees in her mom's eyes, and then deducing that it's actually it's actually somewhere in Thailand. Brilliant.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It was, yeah, that was a lot of work, a lot of revision. But yeah, I had to build that, her abilities and how her mind thinks. And one of the things that came within all of the gyrations of writing the book is that it was originally written as a novel in third person limited. So there was a narrator and it kind of bounced all around. There's a lot of head hopping, and I got some advice later in that that you really should write it in first person, because the protagonist is really interesting, and the quirkiness and all that stuff. And if you're writing in first person, it will force you to see everything through her eyes, which will make the readers gravitate to her a little bit more as she moves through the story, which was one of the best things I ever did.
Right. Who's your favorite character in the novel, besides Simone, obviously?
Yeah, I've been asked that a couple of times. The V is special to me for a couple of ways. The V, for namesake, the V was my grandmother. Her name was Vera, but everyone called her the V, and she was a pretty extraordinary lady. And the character of the V in the book is developed to sort of be, the balance to Simone. That she's that friend that you have that will always be your friend. They make you a little bit uncomfortable. The relationship isn't always, smooth, but you know that they're going to be there for you, if times get tough. And sort of the levity that the character of the V brings to some of the stories or some of the scenes within the book is really necessary. You need those counterbalances within the story to sort of bring the best out of the protagonist, much like her younger sister Mia, who's that precocious, spotlight grabbing younger sister that wants to be out there for everything, which is the exact opposite of Simone, but she doesn't begrudge her for that at all. She accepts her for who she is and moves on and has great devotion to her, actually. So yeah, there's a lot of good characters in there, and the next book there's some more good ones. So yeah, I really like that process of developing. There's characters that really complement the story and push the story.
Fair enough. And I think next she moves from Paris. The action is set in London. Is that so?
Yeah, there's a few places in Europe that it bounces around in early, but the majority of the story is in London, which is exciting. So a lot more Google Maps, a lot more research and things like that. And the other thing that was incredibly helpful is, as a friend who was a school teacher in England, who had read the book and was a big supporter of the book, agreed to be one of my beta readers. So she read it, and as she would say, sort of knocked off all the Americanisms to make it sound more English or more European. And that process was fantastic because their school system, or the way the grades are done, are a little bit different than ours here, and how teachers are referred to. So that was fantastic because it really raises the authenticity of the experience of reading it.
Yes, that I think that explains a lot. And how about the French? Are you schooled in French? You know French? You speak French?
I do not. Again, more research. English is my only language. It's something I'm not very skilled with. But no, a lot of that. And with the first book, I did have someone read it who was a French professor. So went through it to make sure that the grammar was as correct as it could be. A few people that have read it have pointed out that there were a few mistakes, but in 43,000 words, whatever it is, a few misspeaks in a foreign language are okay.
Easy to be pardoned.
Yeah, there's a lot of words in it.
Yes, absolutely. I actually thought you spoke French, or as I said, I really thought you had a connect with Paris, and that's how it is set in Paris. It sounds so authentic.
No, it's nice for you to say that. Well, I must have gotten away with it then.
Right. And I gather from what you're speaking that you've had a lot of opportunities to observe children, because I think you've captured each of their mischiefs, their caprices, their idiosyncrasies, and their charm. It's captured so well.
Well, thank you. And the other thing, from reading a lot of other middle grade books and younger books, female characters tend to be far more interesting. And I don't have a daughter. We have two boys. And people have asked me that before. You seem to be able to, capture this young girl's persona and all this stuff. And a lot of that was, recommendations from my wife, and just really working at trying to develop a very distinct character that can get through all of these things. So the idea of having a female character was just far more interesting than a male character. Even some of the better books like Harry Potter or some of those, Harry really quite isn't as interesting earlier as some of the other characters. But then that character is sort of developed in there. But yeah, female characters starting out usually far more interesting.
I would surely agree with you on that, because and moreover, Simone here definitely has such a uniqueness about her. Somebody who is so very what would you say? She loves drawing attention to herself, and
Right. She does not like the spotlight. That is for sure. And those were things that, as I was writing the book, one of the things that became apparent to me is the characters had to have very distinct personalities. And there were some other characters that were sort of written in there that didn't really push the story, or they didn't really do anything in terms of enhancing the story, and they had to go. And then you try to, when you write the V, or you write Mia, or you write Simone, you try to make them as distinctively themselves as possible, so that their dialogue sounds unique, their actions, how they're doing things, sounds unique and distinct.
that surely I think you managed it perfectly. I mean, every character is so unique, so very distinct, and the voice comes across so beautifully, and it's also communicated in such a novel way. I think that really does a lot of credit to your penmanship.
Well, thank you very much. And one of the big surprises in it, and not to be a spoiler on this, is her ability to sing. And that was something that came out. That was something that came as I was writing the story, that had to be infused in there. That came out of my own personal experience through our oldest son, who was a musical art kid and didn't start singing or realize that he could sing until he was well into middle school. And then that ability allowed him to go to an honors arts high school, and now he's in conservatory here in the United States, and is really really doing well. And we just didn't know. It was a big surprise. And that's one of those things. There's very few things as disarming as getting up on stage and having to perform, much less sing when you don't have any experience doing it. I mean, that would be, especially for the Simone character, that's about the biggest sacrifice they could make in terms of public humiliation or whatever. So that was one that got written into the story to really show her devotion to her family and her dad, and it made for a really nice twist in the story.
True, and both the sisters discussed in this novel are so very poles apart, right? So Mia is this attention-seeking, vivacious young kid, so playful.
Yeah, they had to be polar opposites, because you want them to be very, very different. But I did want them. It was important to me that they had a healthy relationship. That they had a good relationship. They sort of accepted each other's quirks and moved through them. But it was really important to me that they have a loving, caring, a mutual respect for one another, although their lives are quite different.
Were you instrumental in designing the cover page? That was yet another thing that caught my attention. It's so beautifully crafted, and looks like a fairy tale, one of those lovely illustrated fairy tale books, though it's not fairy tale.
I would like to take credit for it, but I cannot. When the book was or I guess we were going through the line editing of the first book, you start to talk about art and all these things, and my publisher has someone that they use to do the art, And the one idea that my wife came up with was she had looked at some deco style travel posters. And there were some famous ones that were done, I guess, in the 20s and 30s. And there was one of a person, I think they were standing on a balcony looking over, and it showed the Eiffel Tower. And that was sort of the inspiration for it. And then, I communicated to my publisher, kind of the elements that we wanted in it, kind of the way we wanted it to look at, and then we sort of collaborated on what that would be. And there was also if you haven't gone through this process, there is an enormous amount of thought that goes into the cover, because a lot of times somebody will, they'll pick it up and they'll look at it and they decide if they want to buy it or not. The cover has to convey a lot just through the palette choices and the fonts and all of these things. And with the first page, it was very important that the setting be immediately grasped by the kid. I mean, you'd immediately see the Eiffel Tower. You'd immediately see, as your eye sort of wanders down, Simone and her dog. There was an issue, put the dog in, take the dog out. And then if you look all the way at the bottom, there's a little lamppost. So your eye sort of tracks in the circular motion when you look at it. But it took probably a couple of months to go from sketches to final coloring on it. And we decided also that it would be more purple, and then it would be dusk, which happens to be my wife's favorite time of day. So if you look at the way all these jackets are going to be designed, they're probably going to be different times of day, and there's going to be a different primary color on all of them, so they look correct together.
That's beautiful. That's again very, very that's very interesting to know. And the cover, as I said, is really does capture your imagination, makes you want to take a peek inside. And again, that's mission accomplished, obviously.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, Kelly, who draws these, is very skilled, and I think she's sketching out the second one now. So hopefully in a few weeks I'll get some pencil sketches, and then we go from there. That's really a part that is way out of my ability to do anything like that. I'm always amazed. I have some friends that are self-published authors, and they do a really good job with the covers, and that's something that I want to hand that off to somebody else who's far more capable than I am.
Fair enough. It's best left to the professionals.
That is correct. Yeah, yes, right on.
All right. Would you like to read for us from your favorite section in the book? I would also be interested to know which is your favorite section in the book.
Right. So I have a couple of sections in the book that I really like. There was one paragraph in particular that I remember writing it early, and it was one of those sort of structural paragraphs that to me set the foundation for a lot of other writing within it. Because with Simone, she's a young girl that has her life very much compartmentalized. She likes that sort of order. She likes things in certain places. And as the story goes on, those things start to clash and come together, which rises the conflict and then eventually to the resolution. So it was really important to me that some of her ideals early in the book are sort of instilled, so the reader will have an idea of where her compass is moving forward through the rest of the story. So this is, bear with me here a second, I think it's the second chapter. So second chapter, page 18. So what has just happened is she's returned to walk through the patisserie, and she's giving a backstory of what's going on, and she just talked about the 73 recipe books that are scattered about the store. So the paragraph after that picks up as follows. To be honest, I have snuck downstairs and read through them countless times. Most people would see them as old, stained books, but to me they are family albums full of memories and history. Since I was 6, I could tell the handwriting and doodle marks of each inscriber. My grandfather, Michael Beresford LaFray, was the only lefty, but my great-grandfather, Thomas John LaFray, had a particularly heavy hand. It is unmistakable. These books and this store are perfect as is. To me, the store is family, the store is safety, and most important of all, the store is where I'm a normal 12-year-old. So that one, I think, really provides context for who she is and what's important in her life, which helps push the story forward.
That's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. And it is kind of treated like a relic, naturally so. The book is so precious then.
Oh, thank you very much.
Right. Okay. So moving on to this bit, yeah. It's clear that you love writing detective fiction. Then, who's your favorite detective in literature?
I've been asked this before, and I as a kid, I remember reading some of the Sherlock Holmes books and enjoying those. I even remember reading, some of the Nancy Drews when I was in elementary school. The mystery stories were always interesting to me because you just didn't know how they were going to turn out, and the better ones would have like two twists in it, and those were even better. But I've always sort of gravitated to those, but just good stories, good, where you feel satisfied at the end of it. You feel that the characters have been well developed and you have a really good sense of why they did the things that they did. But yeah, detective stories and mysteries have always been, part of what I typically read.
Right, that's interesting. Would you be trying your hand at writing either? Have you attempted writing poetry or nonfiction? Is there anything in the pipeline on those lines?
No poetry. That is something I really haven't done, to be quite honest. But I think for me, in the writing in the short term, I do have some other ideas for some possible storylines that are not middle grade. But these are things that I'll probably think about for a few years until they feel like something that I really need to start putting down on a pad and starting to form out. And when they're ready to come out, hopefully I'll be able to write them. But for right now, it's this series, and trying to get it fully written out, because it is a challenge, because I don't get to write all the time. So it's one of those things that when I'm writing, it's an enormous amount of work, and it's a lot of late nights and a lot of weekends and things like that. So I'm not looking to take on any additional writing tasks at this point. But I think there's at least 3 or 4 more books in this series that I have to get to, and right now we're in the process of getting the second one ready to publish this summer, which I'm really excited about. And something else that's come up is the first book is being readapted for a possible movie or something like that. So that's a process that this year is very exciting as well. So a lot of good things happening in the Simone LaFray world.
That's really exciting. So it's going to be adapted into a movie, is it?
Well, it was a finalist in a pipeline contest. So right now it's being basically packaged up to be offered to media companies and pitched and things like that. And that's certainly a whole nother world that I have no experience in. But they seem very optimistic in terms of its possibility, because they see it as something that's readily adaptable. You can easily see, how this would look like from a cinematic way. And the other thing that was interesting about it, and I've had a couple of reviewers make this same comment, is they were surprised that in children's literature that there hasn't been a story about a spy girl that lives in books.
I do
which was shocking to a lot of people.
right. Yeah. I mean, barring the famous Fives and the Hardy Boys, which is not. I mean, Simone LaFray is definitely not in that league. There's a hint of that, but then it's certainly not in that league. And yeah, there's hardly anything. I think she comes across as far more intellectual, far more adult than that. That's for sure.
Yeah, and especially in contemporary time, there's really nothing quite like it. And right now, original material is what a lot of people are looking for. So, we have our hook in the water, and maybe we're gonna fish on the line.
I'm sure. Good luck with that. And
Yes.
how did this magic with publishers happen? How did you get into having publishers accept your book?
Well, that is, most of it was online, and that was a very long process. I mean, I've said this at literacy conventions or talks and things like that it is a long process. And the idea, for me, self-publishing didn't seem like a viable option, because I wanted to be the writer, and I didn't feel like I had expertise in all these other things, certainly not marketing and distribution and all these things. So to me, I knew that I had to find a publisher, and that would take some time. So it was a lot of query letters, a lot of back and forth, a lot of back and forth with literary agents, and I actually have a file somewhere on it. But I think this book, I think it was rejected over 70 times through the whole process. But then what was very nice is I had, through the process, I did have some people that I would reach out to that would give me some really good feedback on it. They would say, it's not for us, or, it feels like it's not quite done yet, keep working on it, or did you consider this or that, which helped me along the way. And because I'm not a professional writer, I wasn't on a timeline, and I could sort of absorb this feedback and work through it to develop something that I was ultimately really proud of. And in the end, was able to find a publisher, or a couple of publishers at the end, actually, that were really enthusiastic about it. They had a similar vision for it. They didn't want to change it. I had some publishers that wanted to change it quite a bit. They wanted to, make it a little more accessible. And, at this point in my life, with all the experiences that I've had, there's no reason to settle for anything. You want to wait until you find somebody that's very much in line with your vision for your writing, because it's a very personal thing. To, in my late 40s, all of a sudden come out with a piece of middle grade fiction. I mean, it was a surprise to many, and of course, you want it to be the best that it can.
Absolutely. So is it sheer luck that you came across this? I forget the name of the publishing house.
Bernie Lane. It's interesting. They were sometimes I had this feeling that things happen for a reason sometimes, and they were actually, when it was written as a early chapter book, they were one of the very first ones. I think the very first one that I reached out to, and they declined it. And something in me at that point said, they're going to want this someday. And I just continued, it was years later, it was almost 2 years later that the next, or I guess it would have been the third version of it, with all the manuscripts came through. And it just seemed that it was kismet. It was meant to be. And, they were very excited with the way the book finally came to them. And we moved forward with that. So they're publishing the second book as well. And, hopefully we're going to have a long relationship with this.
So that's fantastic that your persistence actually paid off, and I'm sure they're thrilled with the book now. It's doing so well.
You have to. And in this, I didn't know anything about publishing. And it's one of these businesses, it moves at a very slow pace. In my professional life, things move in days and weeks. And in the literary world, it's months and years. And I was actually contacted by some people 8 months after I had signed my publishing deal, for people that either wanted to represent it or they wanted more information or something. It just moves at a glacial pace, and you have to develop a thick skin. You get a lot of no's. You get a lot of no thank yous, and that hopefully you're just getting closer to a yes down the road. But you have to be persistent, and you have to be confident in your work, for sure.
That's right. That's correct. And but when do you usually write? I think, as you were mentioning, you usually write at night. Do you write on a regular basis?
The first book I wrote pretty much between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., somewhere in there, sometimes later than that. It was a time when the house was very quiet, and I could just sort of, zone out and immerse myself in the work. So that usually the first draft is done at night. And then once I get to the second draft, then it's weekends and trying to find time here and there. But I found that it's one of those things that I have to devote probably 4 to 5 hours of uninterrupted time to really get anything done. I mean, interruptions are the worst. And you have to be able to sort of focus on a 4 to 5 hour period. And for most people, that's difficult to find. And it also has to be time when you're sharp. I mean, there's sometimes late at night where your creativity tank is empty and you just don't want to write. So you put it to the side. But I'm not one of those writers that has to write every day. And I'm not a person that says, oh, I need 3,000 words this week or something like that. I mean, for me, it's far more productive and efficient to write when I want to, when I really feel I have something to write, and when I also have the time to do so.
Right. So whenever the muse hit you is when you picked up the pen?
Yes. Yeah, usually, yeah, that's exactly how it happens.
Right, fair enough. So, what is the one piece of advice or suggestion that you would want to give to writers, especially who want to write detective novels, who want to write detective fiction in that sense?
Right. I would say the two things. The one thing that you talked about earlier, persistence, and that's just the process of getting it published, which is sort of separate than the writing part. But for the writing part, you have to get used to your own voice. You have to get used to your own authenticity, because I think a lot of writers, and me uh, included, early when you start to write, you sort of replicate the writers that you like, and at some point it just doesn't sound right. It sounds like a cover band or something. It's not quite right, and you really have to trust your own voice and get used to the sound of your own dialogue and internal dialogue as you're going through it, and then the whole world opens up to you once you're doing that. But you have to be able to be comfortable with your own writing style, with your own writing voice. And then once you're able to do that, it's amazing how things really start to flow.
Right. Are you better at promoting your book now after having got one book in? Are you better with promoting now?
Yeah, promoting is part of the whole deal as well. I mean, it is a marketing effort that is ongoing, and books take years, sometimes years to find audiences. It's a very crowded space. Hundreds of books are published on Amazon every day, and now with COVID, you're not able to go out and do book signings and do events and things like that. That really develop sort of the grassroots readership for what you're doing. But it's been amazing to see that the interest of it in India, and the interest in it in Canada and Australia, and all over the globe. It's really incredible. And I think my publisher told me very early that trust in your work, and if it's good, it'll find its audience. But there has to be effort to market it in that process. I mean, you have to put yourself out there.
True. Now, despite the advent of the internet and all the things that we keep talking about, all the cliches and platitudes, all of that on one side, but there is a dedicated reading public, and possibly that's the reason why we have so many writers as well.
There is, which is, it's almost sort of like a secret society. There are a lot of very dedicated readers that consume, hundreds of books a year. I'm not one of them. I'm sort of a hot and cold reader. I either am reading a lot or not reading at all. When I'm writing, I tend to read more in genre, just for inspiration and to sort of have those things in my head. But yeah, there's a massive reading population out there. I was actually at a book signing once where people that went through had multiple Kindles because they had maxed out the memory on their Kindles, which to me seemed impossible. But there are people out there that read a lot of books.
That's really amazing, and encouragingly so. I think as writers, we are thrilled to know that there are so many readers.
Yeah, so and for me, for middle grade, it was one of the parts of middle grade that was enticing for me was to get younger readers, excited about reading. Not necessarily to read something for a class, to write a paper, but something that they really enjoy, something that really pulls them through. And when they finish it, they feel like they've accomplished something, that it's a story that was worth the time to get through it, especially for readers that sort of struggle or have issues reading. It was really important to me that it be something of quality that they could read and feel accomplished and feel really good about, and might spark their interest to read not only my other books, hopefully, but other books in the genre, or start reading up.
Right. So between Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, whom would you pick?
Sherlock Holmes, probably. I mean, that was part of. I read some of his books, all the movies, all that stuff. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is pretty hard to beat.
Right, I know. It's epoch. I mean, no detective fiction is complete without paying obeisance to Sherlock Holmes, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Okay. Well, so finally, what is any special message for viewers of the Writer Talks?
No, I would just say, if you're thinking about writing and that's something that you've always wanted to do, start today. You can edit a blank page. Start today. Start, word blurbing. I have a box somewhere around here that has these that have pages of word blurbs and doodles and all of these things. But it is most important that you say, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to start today. And you see it through. Keep on it. Keep working forward on it. And you never know how things are going to work out. And sometimes it's shockingly and wonderful and surprising how things work.
True. And I think there are facets of oneself that we end up discovering during the process of writing.
Yeah, I think so. And also being a writer, it also makes you appreciate other books. Like when I read a book now, I am so appreciative of the effort that goes into it because you have a sense of what it takes to produce these things.
True. What has been the best compliment so far that you've received?
I've had a couple of kids read it and tell me, that this is the best book I've ever read, or that they love a certain character. They say, well, that's how I feel. That's how I see things as well. Because I've said this to some others. This book is not for everybody. I mean, but if it's for you, I think it's a book that you're really going to gravitate to, and you're really going to enjoy to see, how Simone saves the day within this. But it's a full story. It's one that's sort of deep in terms of the relationships and the character arc and stuff like that. So that's always been the best, is when somebody, a kid that that intended audience reads it and they tell you how much they love it, or draw pictures and send you the pictures. I mean, there's just nothing better than getting a picture of your characters.
Oh, that must have been really exciting.
It is, yeah.
What was your niece's reaction when she realized that she is the inspiration behind Simone?
Yeah, she was really surprised. Very excited to get it. Very surprised even when I gave her the first little printed out copy, and then as it kept going, she was really excited about the whole thing. So yeah, she's definitely gotten a kick out of it.
That's lovely. So, is the current pandemic featuring in one of Simone's next upcoming adventures?
It hasn't, and I thought about that, but I'm trying to make the stories so that they're timely and they're not necessarily compartmentalized into certain, time and genre. One of the compliments that I've gotten on the book is it could have been written in 15, 20 years ago, and it would still read contemporary. So I'm trying not to do that. It's funny, I do try to lace little conflicts into it that a child of that age would see. In this second book, there are some issues with interruptions in technology and things like that that they would be, certainly aware of if their cell phones aren't working or things like that. There would be those types of things. But in terms of the pandemic, no.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Steve. Lovely talking to you, and I'm sure there will be more and more readers for going for Simone LaFray's really, really wonderful adventure.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you. Ahoy.
Bye-bye.